All right, let's take a look at our practice test now. We're told to solve each equation, and for the problems today, we're going to use the method known as completing the square. So for the first problem, we have x squared minus 4x minus 32, and this is set equal to 0. All right, so the idea here is that the first thing you would do is make sure that the coefficient on x squared is a 1. If it's not, we have to do additional work. In this case, it is, so we can skip to the next step. What you want to do is put all the variable terms on one side, typically I use the left, and put your constant on the other. So in other words, what I want to do is add 32 to both sides of the equation. So this would cancel away. And so what you have now is x squared minus 4x is equal to 32. Okay, so here's where people get a little bit lost. What you want to do is you want to take 1/2 of the coefficient that's on x to the first power. So in this case, that's negative 4. So let's put negative 4 times 1/2. So this is where I say cut it in half. And then you want to square that. So you want to square this. So this is equal to what? Well, negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2, and negative 2 squared is going to be positive 4. So this right here is what you need to add to both sides of the equation so that the left side is a perfect square trinomial. So what I'm going to do, let me actually move this off to the side. I'm going to say that I'm going to go x squared minus 4x. I'm going to add 4 to the left, and to make that legal, I'm going to add 4 to the right. So I didn't do anything illegal. I added 4 over here and added 4 over here. So you can get rid of this scratch work at this point. What you want to do now is factor the left-hand side. I've now created a perfect square trinomial, so this factors into a binomial squared. So this would be x minus 2 quantity squared, and this is equal to 32 plus 4 is 36. So now we have this into the form such that we can use the square root property. If this quantity x minus 2 squared is equal to 36, then what we can do is say that x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 36. And from there, we would just split this up into two different equations. So we would say that x minus 2 is equal to, the square root of 36 is going to be 6. Let's say plus or minus 6. So x minus 2 equals 6, or x minus 2 is equal to negative 6. All right, let's slide down here, and let's add 2 to both sides of the equation here. Let's cancel that. We'll have x is equal to 8. Then or, over here, let's add 2 to both sides of the equation. Cancel that. We'll have x is equal to negative 6 plus 2 is going to be negative 4. So my solutions here, you have x equals 8 or x equals negative 4. All right, let's look at the next one. So for problem 2, another easy one, we have x squared minus 4x minus 60 equals 0. Let's slide down a little bit. Again, the first step is always to make sure that the coefficient on x squared is a 1. If it's not, again, we have additional stuff to do. In this case, it's easy. So that's done for us. So the next step is you want to move this guy over here to the right. So you want all your variable terms on the left, or you can put it on the right. Again, it's up to you, but I like it on the left. So I'm going to take x squared minus 4x and keep that on the left. And then I'm going to add 60 to both sides of the equation because you want your constant on the other side. So I want mine on the right. Okay, so here's where we're going to, again, complete the square. So this is the step where everyone gets lost. Look at this coefficient for x to the first power. In this case, it's the same as in the last example, it's negative 4. You want to cut it in half, meaning you multiply by half and then square it. So cut it in half and then square it. And you're going to add that to both sides. So negative 4 times a half, square that, and this is going to give me, again, negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. So this is what we need to add to both sides of the equation, again, to complete the square. And so we'll say that x squared minus 4x, again, I'm going to add 4 over here. This equals 60 plus 4. So I added 4 over here. To make it legal, I added 4 over here. So now we want to just factor this into a binomial squared. So this would be x minus 2 quantity squared is equal to 60 plus 4 is 64. And again, at this point, we can use our square root property. So we can say that basically this is x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 64. We know the square root of 64 is going to be 8. So basically, we can say that x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 8. And here's where we split this up into two different equations. So we'll say that x minus 2 is equal to 8, or x minus 2 is equal to negative 8. What we can do from here is add 2 to both sides of the equation. Let's cancel this away. We have x is equal to 8 plus 2 is 10. Then or over here, let's add 2 to both sides of the equation. Cancel that away. We'll say x is equal to negative 8 plus 2 is going to be negative 6. So we get x equals 10 or x equals negative 6. Okay, let's look at problem number 3 now. So we have x squared minus 10x minus 36 equals 0. So again, the first step is always to make sure that the coefficient for x squared is 1. Again, in this case, we have an easier scenario, so we don't have to do anything there. And then we want to move all the variable terms to one side and the constant to the other. So let's add 36 to both sides of the equation. And we'll say that we have x squared minus 10x. And then we'll say this is equal to positive 36. Okay, so from here, again, what you want to do, this step again is where everyone gets lost. Take the coefficient of the x raised to the first power, cut it in half, and then square it. If you say that a few times, you won't forget. So cut it in half and then square it. So negative 10 times a half, and then square that. So what is negative 10 divided by 2? That's going to be negative 5. You square that, you get 25. So this equals 25. So this is what I need to add to both sides of the equation, again, so I can complete the square or make a perfect square trinomial on the left. Let me actually slide this out of the way, and I'll write this in a different color. So x squared minus 10x, I'm going to add 25 to the left, and again, to make it legal, I'm going to add 25 to the right. Okay, so I added it here and added it here. So now we're done with this scratch work, so let's get rid of this. And so we're going to factor the left-hand side now because this is a perfect square trinomial. So it factors into a binomial squared. So it's going to be x minus 5, quantity squared, and this equals 36 plus 25. That's going to give me 61. Okay, so from here, again, I can use my square root property. So this guy right here would be x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 61. Okay, so we need two different equations here to get our solutions. So we have x minus 5 is equal to square root of 61. Then or we have x minus 5 is equal to the negative of the square root of 61. Now in this case, you could really just combine things because you really can't simplify the square root of 61. And in each case, you're just adding 5 to both sides. So you could put this back into a more compact form if you want. So let me actually do it individually, and then I'll do that way. So let's just add 5 to both sides over in each case. This cancels and this cancels. So you have x is equal to 5 plus the square root of 61, or x equals 5 minus the square root of 61. And then again, you could write this in a more compact form. You could say that x is equal to, you have the 5, and then you have plus, and then you have minus. So you're going to go plus or minus the square root of 61. So you can write it like this or this, whatever you want to do. Let's look at a few now that are a little bit harder. So for problem number 4, we have 3x squared plus 6x minus 70 is equal to negative 10. All right, so the problem here is that you don't have a coefficient of 1 on your x squared, okay? So you want to make sure that it's 1. Now, in this particular case, I would actually do this other step first because I think it's a little bit easier. So let me add 70 to both sides of the equation. And let's get rid of this. So we'll have 3x squared plus 6x is equal to, you have negative 10 plus 70. That is going to give me positive 60. And so from here, I'm going to divide everything by 3. Again, why am I doing that? Because I want the coefficient for x squared to be 1. And since the coefficient is 3, if I divide everything by 3, this is going to cancel and give me 1x squared. Okay, so I have to have that to use this procedure. So this would be x squared plus 6 divided by 3 is 2, so this would be 2x, and this equals 60 divided by 3 is going to give you 20. Okay, so now we have this into the form that we are used to, and again, I'm just looking at the coefficient for my x raised to the first power, and just say it with me, you want to cut it in half and square it. Okay, again, just keep saying that over and over until it just sticks in your mind. So x squared plus, again, you have your 2x. If you take 2 and you cut it in half, multiply by half, and then you square that, 2 times a half is 1, 1 squared is 1. So I'm just going to add 1 to both sides of the equation to complete the square. So plus 1 equals 20 plus 1. Okay, we can just write this as 21 if you want. I think we can keep track of that. So this left side here is just going to get factored into a binomial squared. So we know that this would be x plus 1, quantity squared, is equal to 21. Okay, so now that we have it in this form, we can use the square root property and just say that x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 21. And for 21, it's 7 times 3, so we really can't do anything with that. So if you want to take the time and write it out, you can. I think for this situation, if you know this isn't going to simplify, you could just subtract 1 away from each side and just write your answer more cleanly and say x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 21. So that would cover negative 1 plus the square root of 21 and then negative 1 minus the square root of 21. All right, let's take a look at problem number 5 now. So we have x squared minus 4x plus 48 is equal to negative 5. So we have another easy one because the coefficient on x squared is 1 there. So we really don't have to worry about that. So let's subtract 48 away from each side of the equation. Let's cancel that away. Let's have x squared minus 4x is equal to negative 5 minus 48. That's going to give me negative 53. And from here, again, we're just going to complete the square. So we're going to take this coefficient on x to the first power, which is negative 4. You got to cut it in half. So I'm going to multiply by half, and then I'm going to square it. So cut it in half and square it. So negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4. So I need to add 4 to both sides of the equation. So let's do that real quick. So we'll say that we have x squared minus 4x plus 4 is equal to negative 53, again, plus 4. So I added 4 over here, added 4 over here. So nothing illegal. Let's get rid of this, and let's factor this left-hand side here into a binomial squared. So this would be x minus 2 quantity squared. And this equals negative 53 plus 4 is going to give me negative 49. So what I want to do now is use my square root property. So again, I would just take the x minus 2 here and set this equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 49. So this can actually be simplified. So let's put x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus, let's write the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 49. We know the square root of 49 is 7. We know the square root of negative 1 is I. So let's put this as x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 7i. So from here, what you would do is add 2 to both sides of the equation. And we would say x is equal to 2, we'll say plus or minus 7i. And again, that's one way to write it. If you wanted to write x equals 2 plus 7i or x equals 2 minus 7i, again, that's completely up to you. Okay, let's look at problem number 6 now. So we have 2x squared plus 4x plus 4 is equal to 10. So again, when we think about the coefficient on x squared, it needs to be 1. So you could divide everything by 2 now, or you could subtract 4 away from each side. It's really up to you. I think this is a little bit easier. Let's cancel this away. Let's go 2x squared plus 4x is equal to 6. And now what I'm going to do is divide everything by 2. Again, so that this coefficient here on x squared is 1. That's very important. Don't forget to do that. So this cancels, and you get x squared plus 4 divided by 2 is 2. So 2x is equal to 6 divided by 2 is 3. Okay, so now we have it into the correct form. And what we want to do again is cut this coefficient on x to the first power in half. Let me highlight this real quick. So 2 times a half, and then we want to square it. So cut it in half and square it. So no, 2 times a half is 1. 1 squared is 1. Okay, so we're going to add 1 to both sides of the equation so we can complete the square. So we'll have x squared plus 2x plus 1 is equal to 3 plus 1. Again, I added 1 to the left. I also added it to the right. So looking at this on the left, again, I have a perfect square trinomial, which means I can factor this into a binomial squared. So this is going to be x plus 1 quantity squared is equal to 3 plus 1 is 4. Again, from the square root property, we know that this is x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 4. And then from here, basically you have x plus 1 is equal to square root of 4 is 2. So plus or minus 2. And then we're going to split this into two different equations. So you have x plus 1 is equal to 2. Then or x plus 1 is equal to negative 2. Let's subtract 1 away from each side over here. This cancels. You'll get x is equal to 2 minus 1 is going to be 1. So then or over here, let's subtract 1 away from each side. This cancels. You'll have x is equal to negative 2 minus 1 is going to be negative 3. So you get x equals 1 or x equals negative 3. All right, let's look at problem number 7 now. So what we're going to have here is 4x squared plus 73. This is equal to 6 minus 2x. So again, you're looking at the coefficient on x squared, and in this case, it's a 4. You need it to be a 1. So you could immediately divide everything by 4. You can do that if you want. But I would suggest actually going to the second step first, which is to move all the variable terms to one side and the constants to the other. So let's add 2x to both sides of this equation. Let me put this over here like this. And let me subtract 73 away from both sides of the equation. And the reason I'm going to do that first is so that I don't have to mess with any fractions or anything like that for now. So this is going to cancel and this is going to cancel. So you would have 4x squared. Then you would have plus 2x. So that's my left-hand side. And this equals, now I have 6 minus 73. And that's going to give you negative 67. Okay, so now I can divide everything by 4. Again, you could have done it to start. It's really up to you how you do it. But then you're going to have to combine some fractions, which I think is a little bit more work. So I'm going to divide everything here by 4. And so this right here is going to cancel. And you'll have x squared plus 2 over 4 we know is a half. So you could write x over 2. But I think for this exercise, let's write this as 1/2. and then times x, and this equals, we'll have negative 67 over 4. And there's really nothing you can do to simplify that. 67 is an odd number, so we just have to leave that as it is. Okay, let's come down here a little bit. And again, we want to think about the coefficient that's on x to the first power. So in this case, that's 1/2. So what do? We cut it in half, and then we square it. So if I cut a half in half, it's 1/2 times a half, so that's going to be 1/4 squared. So you would have 1/4 being squared. So the 1 is squared, that's 1, and the 4 is squared, that's 16. So you have 1 over 16 here. So this is what you're going to be adding to both sides of your equation. So let's erase this, and let's say we have x squared plus 1/2 x plus 1 over 16, and this is equal to negative 67 over 4 plus 1 over 16. So this is going to be x plus 1/4 quantity squared. So this is going to be x plus 1/4 quantity squared, and this equals, here you would need a common denominator, so you would have to multiply this by 4 over 4, so you could have a denominator of 16. 4 times negative 67 is going to be negative 268, so let's write negative 268, and this will be over, 4 times 4 is 16, and then plus we have 1 over 16, and of course negative 268 plus 1 would be negative 267, so let's just write this as negative 267 over 16. Okay, so now we have this into the form where we can use our square root property. We'll say x plus 1/4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 267 over 16. Let me make this a little bit better so it covers everything. All right, so there's a lot of simplifying to do. So let's first say that x plus 1/4 is equal to, let's break this up and say plus or minus, we'll say the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 267. This is over the square root of 16. All right, so we know the square root of 16 is 4. So let's replace that. So we would have x plus 1/4 is equal to, we know that the square root of negative 1 is I. So let's put plus or minus. We'll put I times the square root of 267. Now 267 is 3 times 89, but 3 is not a perfect square, and 89 is not a perfect square, and I would note that 89 is a prime number, just like 3 is. So you really can't do anything with this. So this is 267 here, and then this will be over, square root of 16 is 4. Okay, so all we really would want to do to finish this up is subtract 1/4 away from each side of the equation. So what I'll do is say minus 1/4 over here, and minus 1/4 over here, cancel this away, and say x is equal to negative 1/4. Then you have your plus or minus I times the square root of 267 over this 4. Now you have a common denominator, so if you want, you can write this in a more compact way by saying x is equal to, we'll go negative 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 267 over the common denominator of 4. Okay, let's look at problem number 8 now. So we have 8x squared minus 10x plus 5 is equal to negative 8x. All right, so let's clean up just a little bit first. Again, you see that the coefficient on x squared is not 1, so we need to divide some things. But what I'm going to do is actually just add 8x to both sides of the equation and just clean that up and then subtract 5 away from each side of the equation. Let's cancel that away and cancel that away. So let's say we have 8x squared. Negative 10x plus 8x would be negative 2x. And this will be equal to basically just negative 5. So from here, again, I have this 8 that's the coefficient for x squared. This, in order to use our procedure, has to be a 1. So to take care of that, I'm just going to divide everything here by 8. So now what we would do is cancel this and say that x squared minus 2 over 8 is a fourth. So let's write this as 1/4 times x like this, and this equals negative 5/8, and you really can't simplify that fraction. Okay. Thinking about this now, again, I want to complete the square. So I want to take this negative 1/4, I want to cut it in half, and I want to square it. So let's take negative 1/4 times a half, and I want to square this, okay? So this negative 1/4 times a half would be negative 1/8. If I square that, think about squaring 1, that's 1. If I square 8, that's going to be 64, okay? So think about 1 over 64 is going to be added to both sides of the equation. So 1 over 64. So we would have x squared minus 1/4 x plus 1 over 64 is equal to negative 5 over 8 plus 1 over 64. Now let's think about factoring the left side. So this is going to factor into x minus 1/8. Again, this would be quantity squared, and this would be equal to, over here, you need a common denominator. So let's write negative 5 over 8 times 8 over 8, because I would want 64 as my denominator, because that's what I have over here. So plus 1 over 64. So let's just rewrite this. So x minus 1/8 quantity squared is equal to negative 5 times 8 is going to be negative 40. So let's say this is negative 40 plus 1 over the common denominator of 64. So this would be negative 39 over 64. So let's write this side as negative 39 over 64. So from here, I'm going to use my square root property. So we know that this would be x minus 1/8 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 39 over 64. So let's split this up and say this is x minus 1/8 is equal to plus or minus, again, you have the square root of negative 1, which is going to be I, times the square root of 39. Now, 39 is 13 times 3, so you're not going to be able to do anything with that. This is over the square root of 64, which we know is 8. So let's go x minus 1/8 is equal to plus or minus, this would be I, square root of negative 1 is I, the imaginary unit, times the square root of 39 over the square root of 64 is 8. All right, to finish things up, let's add 1/8 to both sides of the equation. That would cancel. You have x is equal to, let's say 1/8 plus or minus I times the square root of 39 over 8. And again, if you want to condense this, you could say x is equal to, let's go 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 39 over the common denominator of 8. All right, let's take a look at problem number 9 now. So we have 69 minus 17x is equal to 4x minus 2x squared. Now I like my variable terms to be on the left, but what you could do is you could just add 17x to both sides of the equation. So let's do that real quick. We'll have 69 is equal to 4x plus 17x is going to give me 21x, and then minus 2x squared, and then you could just flip things legally. So what I can do is actually just say this is negative 2x squared plus 21x is equal to 69. All right, so from here, remember, the coefficient on x squared has to be 1. Right now it's negative 2, so you've got to get rid of that. So I'm going to divide everything here by negative 2. And so this is going to cancel. You'll have x squared, then you can have minus 21 over 2 times x is equal to negative 69 over 2. All right, so now, again, we're going to go into completing the square. We need to take the coefficient for this x to the first power. In this case, it's negative 21 over 2. We need to cut it in half, and then we need to square it. So in this case, you have negative 21 over 2 times a half, and then we're going to square that. And so negative 21 over 2 times a half would be negative 21 over 4. And then we're going to square this. So what is negative 21 being squared? 441. And 4 squared we know is 16. So 441 over 16 is what we need to add to both sides of the equation. And let's say that this is x squared minus 21 over 2 times x plus 441 over 16 is equal to negative 69 over 2. Again, this is going to be plus this 441 over 16. Let me slide this down so it all fits. Okay, let me make this 16 a little bit better. So we already know that we're going to need a common denominator over here, so I'm just going to write times 8 over 8, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So I want to factor the left side into a binomial squared, and I know with things like this, it gets a little bit tricky to factor, but remember, it's always going to be whatever you took here that you cut in half before you squared it, right? So before you squared it, you had negative 21 over 4, so it's x minus 21 over 4. Okay, so this is what we want. So x minus 21 over 4, that quantity being squared. Over here, let's do negative 69 times 8. That's going to give me negative 552. Then you have plus 441, and this is over 16. So negative 552 plus 441, that's going to give me negative 111. So let's come down here and say that we have the quantity x minus 21 over 4 being squared is equal to, again, this up here would be negative 111, and this is over 16. All right, so from my square root property, again, I know that this would be x minus 21 over 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 111 over 16. And now we can just do some simplifying here. So we have x minus 21 over 4 is equal to plus or minus, let's say the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 111, and this is over the square root of 16. So we know the square root of 16 is 4. Then for the square root of 111, 111 is 37 times 3, so you really can't do anything with that. We know the square root of negative 1 is I. So let's write over here that x minus 21 over 4 is equal to, we'll go plus or minus I times the square root of 111, and this is over, square root of 16 is 4. So you have this common denominator that you're going to have. If you add 21 over 4 to both sides, let's just do this the long way so nobody gets lost. So let's add 21 over 4 to both sides of the equation. Let's cancel this away. We'll say x is equal to, we'll have 21 over 4, then plus or minus I times the square root of 111 over 4. And again, you have a common denominator there, so most people will just decide to write this as x is equal to, we'll go 21 plus or minus I times the square root of 111 over the common denominator of 4. All right, let's take a look at problem number 10 now. So what we're going to have here is 10x squared minus 4x is equal to 142. So in this case, we really don't have to do much work in terms of moving things because I have all my variable terms on the left and I have my constant on the right. So I'm looking at this coefficient for x squared and it's a 10. So of course we need to divide everything by 10 to get rid of that. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. 10 divided by 10 is 1. So let's go ahead and put this as x squared and then minus 4 over 10. You think about 4 divided by 2 is 2 and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So this is 2/5 times x and this equals 142 divided by 10. You could cancel a common factor of 2 and so this would be 71 over 5. Okay, so from here, again, I want to complete the square. So let's look at this coefficient for x to the first power. It's negative 2/5. So cut it in half, negative 2/5 times a half, and then square that result. So just simplifying here, this would cancel, and basically you would have negative 1/5, and if that was squared, again, the negative goes away. 1 squared is 1, 5 squared is 25. So you're going to be adding 1 over 25 to both sides of the equation. So 1 over 25. So I'm going to have, on the left side, x squared minus 2/5 x plus 1 over 25 is equal to 71 over 5 plus, again, this 1 over 25. So adding 1 over 25 to both sides of the equation. And then from here on the left side, you can factor this into a binomial squared. So again, I know when you work with fractions it's tough, but what did we square? We squared negative 1/5, right? So we want x minus 1/5 quantity squared. That's all you have to think about. So this is equal to, over here, let's just get a common denominator going. So let's put this as times 5 over 5. 71 times 5, that's 355. Then plus 1 over the common denominator of 25. So this would be 356. Let's write this in another step so nobody gets lost. So we'll say the quantity x minus 1/5 being squared is equal to, this would be 356 over 25. And from here, I can just use my square root property. So in other words, what I could say is that x, then we have minus 1/5. This will be equal to plus or minus the square root of 356 over 25. All right, from here we can break this up. So let's say this is x minus 1/5 is equal to plus or minus, you'll have the square root of 356 over the square root of 25. Now we know the square root of 25 is 5, but what about the square root of 356? Well, 356 is 89 times 4. So let me write this as the square root of 89 times the square root of 4. So that's a little bit more clear. And then we know that this would be x minus 1/5 is equal to plus or minus. The square root of 4 is 2, so let's write 2 times the square root of 89 over, we know the square root of 25 is 5. Okay, so from here I could just add 1/5 to both sides of the equation. So let's do that right here. So plus 1/5 and then plus 1/5. Let's cancel that away. And we'll say x is equal to 1/5, then plus or minus 2 times the square root of 89 over 5. So again, if you want to, and I advise this, you can write this in a more compact form because you have a common denominator. So you have x is equal to, you'll have 1 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 89 over the common denominator of 5.